It is to Elon Musk that our attention turns first this morning, but I'm not, in the first instance, quite sure how. So something a bit weird has happened to me in the context of what you might describe as Elon Musk's universe, and I don't think we're going to have this argument today, but I don't think that there is much mileage in the argument that you should just ignore him. I think that's a vexed argument at the very best of times when somebody is dealing in disinformation and propaganda, or at worst, at the very least, dealing in sort of provocation and unpleasantness. And the idea that you ignore them, that to me always seems to have a slight caveat attached to it. You ignore them until you can't. But in Elon Musk's case, I don't think that caveat applies. If you are essentially in lockstep with the next president of the free world, if you are widely perceived to be the de facto deputy president, if you own one of the biggest social media platforms in the world, albeit one that has become something of a sort of far-right fertilizer since he started unbanning various liars, grifters and racists. If you are the richest man in the world and therefore capable of exercising epic power in all territories almost, then you cannot be ignored. I think it's foolish and naive to pretend that you can. But you notice a little pause in my voice there, I think, just a little catch. Should we be talking about this? Another thing that happened to me, the thing that I was referring to when I said I'm going through quite a strange phase, is that I'm barely on Twitter anymore. And here's a really interesting thing that is going to land with some people listening to this with absolute statement of the bleeding obvious energy, and with other people, I don't think you'll believe me. If you weren't on Twitter much over the holiday period, then an awful lot of what is dominating the news agenda today will have almost entirely passed you by. It's a really weird thing. I mean, wherever you get your news from, you'll be aware that Elon Musk has waded into the grooming gang story that has been covered quite widely in this country since 2011. But of course, the myth that it hasn't has taken hold in all sorts of corners of the country. So Elon Musk has waded into that, but much more dangerously, he's launched libelous attacks on Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, and on Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, which I think come from essentially subscribing to the sort of accounts that were banned for disinformation and racism before he bought Twitter. I don't know, because as I say, I haven't been on there much, but catching up on it yesterday afternoon and this morning in preparation for coming back to work, catching up on it and wondering, as I always do, whether or not we overthink these things. As far as I can tell, Elon Musk is just another Twitter account, albeit the biggest and the most powerful and the owner and the future de facto deputy president of the USA. I think he's just another Twitter account that desperately wants to believe all of the posts about all foreigners being criminals. He seems to me to be, I don't know whether white supremacist or whether he's still got the vestiges of the South African apartheid that he grew up on the wrong or the right side of, I suppose, depending on your politics. But you can overthink these things. You can dig too deeply into these things. When perhaps the answer is quite simple. He just believes it all. I know that there are conversations about some of his personal habits, the fact that he apparently doesn't sleep much, the fact that he's up in the middle of the night tweeting about and into the only sort of English language country that will be up and about in the middle of the night in America. But I think he might just be somebody who believes the most ridiculous nonsense from the kind of accounts on Twitter that have now been able to buy prominence by paying him money and getting blue ticks that were once reserved for people that had sort of proven themselves in professional fields. I think he just believes the worst excesses of the sewer that he has created. I mean, it's a psychologically extraordinary situation. He just is another person there's always that tension, isn't there, between what you believe and what you want to believe. That idea. So when we first started talking about the grooming gangs on this program in 2011, and recognising and acknowledging that there was a huge disproportionate representation of men of Pakistani background in that very specific and particular type of crime. I was 2 or 3 phone-ins into the topic before I realised what was bothering me about it. And there was a desperation among some callers to use the crimes of some disgusting and despicable people to malign an entire population, to malign everybody brown, to malign everybody Muslim, to malign everybody of Pakistani heritage, despite, the percentages being negligible in the context of the broader population. And that, I think, might be where Elon Musk is coming from. Robert Jenrick seems to be coming from there in the last few days. This desperation to use the crimes of disgusting people to denigrate and malign entire demographics, as if, recent scandals in the Church of England rendered every Christian in the country complicit in paedophilia, as if recent scandals in the Catholic Church rendered every Catholic in the country somehow complicit in paedophilia or supportive of violent sex crimes, as if, the preponderance of DJs and television presenters that we saw being unveiled as disgusting predators over the last few years somehow taught us anything about television presenters and radio presenters who are not disgusting predators. There's a hunger to use the crimes of a small number of people to malign entire demographics. And I see that going on with Musk, but I see it very much as quite two-dimensional race hate. The kind of accounts I was telling you about last year, where you just have clip after clip after clip of people of colour committing crimes, as if no white person ever commits crime. This desperation to believe that your ethnicity is somehow indicative of your criminality. I'm talking about ethnicity, not nationality. So I don't know. That seems to me to be partly where Elon Musk is coming from. But his attacks on Keir Starmer are extraordinary and, potentially quite dangerous. You know that 2 members of parliament in this country have been assassinated in recent years, and some of the rhetoric that Elon Musk has shared about Jess Phillips could have a terrible effect upon an impressionable mind in the context of her personal safety. Some of the language that he's deployed, I'll share with you shortly, is absolutely hideous. And similarly with Keir Starmer, to accuse Keir Starmer of a sort of complicity in rape when the man as DPP literally pressed the button on the prosecution of so-called grooming gangs, letting people like Nazir Afzal, the chief prosecutor in the Northwest, go after them with absolute, I'd use the word passion, actually, for want of a better one, go after them with enthusiasm and determination. For Elon Musk to claim from a position of, I presume, Twitter-inspired ignorance that Keir Starmer has somehow done something wrong is incredibly dangerous. And also, I don't normally go in for this sort of thing, it offends my patriotic sensibilities as well. Now, I may not have said that if I was presenting this show yesterday morning, because I'm conscious of all the people that would come crawling out of the woodwork to say, oh, you've only got a problem with him because he's such a big fan of Farage. But of course, now he's come out and said that Farage is not fit to lead reform, which means that I think you can probably say, without any fear or favour, that nobody should be listening to Elon Musk's opinions on British politics and his, I would say, pretty close to libellous maligning of our Prime Minister and the Labour politician who has done more in the arena of women's safety than arguably anybody else alive is despicable and disgusting. So who's in favour? Who's cheering him on? And then you come back to this extraordinary subculture of sewage that he has allowed to flourish on his own social media platform, who either believe it or think that there is something to be achieved by encouraging lots of other people to believe it as well. So here's the question. The first one is a bit weird. I haven't been on there much, and I'm not going back, I don't think. I'm on Blue Sky, if you're remotely interested in my occasional burblings, which is an altogether happier space where you're not really allowed. It's not brilliantly regulated because they haven't got the money, but you're not really allowed to lie. And if you don't want to see somebody's toxic bile, it's quite easy to remove them from your orbit. So explain to somebody who's not plugged into social media what Elon Musk is doing. All right? That's challenge number one, which is relatively easy if you have been paying attention. 0345 6060973. Question number two is altogether different, and I would suspect much, much harder to answer. What should Keir Starmer do about this? You have an incredibly powerful man, objectively incredibly powerful, whether you like it or not, however you dice it, however you cut it. The man is incredibly powerful. Even if it was his wealth and ownership of Twitter alone, his power would be unprecedented. But he is, of course, also a key consigliere to the incoming President of the United States of America, a regime and administration that the Labour government have made it clear they are keen to do business with, for good or for ill. I have no idea how Keir Starmer should handle this. Elon Musk is essentially painting potentially hideous targets on the back of British politicians like Jess Phillips and Keir Starmer, targets that are forged from ignorance and misinformation. But given his power, what on earth can he do? So, what has Elon Musk been up to in the context of British politics and the grooming gang scandals? 0345 6060973. And what on earth, I really need your help with the second one, by the way. What on earth should Keir Starmer do about this? How should Keir Starmer handle it? Because one of the things I've learned over the last few years is that when you're dealing with lies driven by racism, sometimes the truth doesn't touch the sides. When you're dealing with lies driven by racism, when, for example, the answer to claims about the absence of inquiries is to point out how many inquiries there have been, to point out that Alexis J, who delivered her inquiry that was called partly as a consequence of the grooming gang scandals, has insisted that the last government did nothing to implement the 20 recommendations that she made. I don't think Elon Musk even knows that. I don't think he knows that we spent tens of millions of pounds on an inquiry into child sexual abuse up and down the country, focusing on various quarters, including my old school, would you believe, got a sort of chapter of its own, but looking directly and specifically at grooming gang scandals as well, and made 20 recommendations that the last government ignored. I wonder whether Elon Musk knows that the Prime Minister, whose passage into Downing Street was generously greased by Nigel Farage, described inquiries into child sexual abuse as spaffing money up the wall, sitting largely unchallenged, I think, in this very studio, where Nigel Farage will be sitting tomorrow. It's almost as if the truth doesn't matter because the intoxicating unpleasantness that Twitter is now almost entirely made of is so powerful. So what on earth can Keir Starmer do about it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I mean, I'd sometimes say serious or silly answers, but it's too serious a question to admit silly answers. But by silly, I just mean left field. I mean, I think Brazil closed him down entirely, didn't they? I'm leaning to the idea that Keir Starmer should just do that. 0345 6060 973.